Welcome back to the DrupalEasy podcast. This is season 16, episode number 3. In today's episode, I'll be talking with Andy Giles about GitHub Copilot, the Visual Studio Code extension and PhpStorm plugin that brings AI capabilities to your code editor. Before we get to the interview, let me tell you a little bit about DrupalEasy's long-form training programs. First, we have our beginner-focused Drupal Career Online that is now in its second decade. This class meets twice a week for 12 weeks starting on February 12th. You can learn more at one of our free 1-hour Taste of Drupal webinars. All of the details are at drupaleasy.com/DCO. Now, our second long-form Drupal training course is called Professional Module Development. This is 90 hours of instruction over 15 weeks, also meeting for 2 half-days a week. We cover topics such as developer tools, dependency injection, custom plugins, caching, and plenty of PHP unit tests. Class begins January 30th. Learn more at our free 30-minute A Closer Look. All of the details at drupaleasy.com/PMD. Andy, welcome to the DrupalEasy podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Mike. How are you?
Pretty good. So we've known each other for a couple of years, we'll say, at least.
At least.
You've been in the Drupal community for, according to your Drupal.org profile, 13 years and 6 months.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
How many years do you have there?
I think I'm over 16.
Ooh.
Yeah.
All right.
It's been a minute.
You got me beat, but I guess you could say we're both OGs.
OGs, yeah.
Yeah.
You are the owner, developer, HR, IT, VP, all of the positions at Blue Oak Interactive. Tell us a little bit about Blue Oak real quick.
Yep. So I started Blue Oak Interactive in 2012. I was doing web development for another company and decided I should start my own thing and really wanted to focus on Drupal mainly. And so that, got me out on my own and started going to Drupal camps, the regional ones, Atlanta, Florida, Asheville, meeting all the wonderful people of the community and, just been doing that for quite a while now. We've primarily focused originally on Drupal Commerce in Drupal 7. And since then, we've kind of moved just to like general Drupal development. We do a lot of third-party integrations with external APIs. Just anything that's like, not able to be done with a module that can just be installed is kind of where I come in. And
you do a bit of decoupled stuff as well.
We have done, recently we did a Drupal Next.js front end site, which it turned out really nice and was a good developer experience. Not to say it didn't have its issues, but, some of the things that give you headaches in Drupal were solved by decoupling. And then, of course, there were new headaches to come along with it.
All brand new, shiny JavaScript headaches. Yeah,
that's right.
So I'd be remiss if I didn't do at least one AI podcast this season. So here we are.
Nice.
We're going to talk about GitHub Copilot.
Sure.
So Andy, in as few words as possible, what is GitHub Copilot?
Yeah, I would say GitHub Copilot is a programmer's friend in your IDE. It just reduces the steps between asking large language models questions about your code and getting feedback. It's right in the IDE. It's continually being improved. When it first came out, it was a little rough, but now, it's direct integration where you can select text in your IDE and ask questions about that particular piece of code, or there's now a chat feature so you can ask just general questions within the IDE. So you don't have to open up a separate browser window, go ChatGPT or whatever LLM you're using. It's directly embedded.
Yeah, it kind of saves you that step of every time you want to use AI, from opening up Claude or ChatGPT or Bard or whatever and giving context. And
yeah, so I think the biggest part of it is the context with the integration with Copilot. Before, which was like 2 months ago, you'd have to like copy and paste code back and forth into your browser, to interact with an LLM to give it the context it needs to answer your questions. Whereas now Copilot's directly integrated. You can, the tabs that you have open are automatically provided as context, but you can select, a block of text if you have a particular question about that. Or there's actually, I just read this week they rolled out workspace context, which will actually attempt to like create embeddings from your entire project and then do we can get into how all this works, but like it does a search and then submits the search results to Copilot to provide that context of like the larger project as a whole, to answer your questions. So pretty crazy.
Yeah, before I first started using it day to day, I just kind of envisioned it as like autocomplete on steroids. Because most IDEs, if you have the right extensions or plugins, or if you're using PhpStorm, which has a lot of the PHP stuff built in, it's, I wouldn't say constantly, but almost constantly giving you autocomplete suggestions. When you're using GitHub Copilot, it's giving you autocomplete suggestions that are just out of this world. Sometimes fantastic, sometimes a little bit annoying, but it's really, it does that. But then, as we'll talk about, there's a whole lot more that Copilot is bringing to the table.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the auto completions in the IDE because that's one of the friction points I've had with integrating Copilot into my workflow is that when you start typing something, Copilot pops up, the IDE auto completions pop up. And so sometimes there's a little bit of a conflict there. And like the biggest problem I have with Copilot right now is that it's pretty like block oriented. So whatever block you're typing in, that's where it's going to inject whatever it's providing. So if you have like a use statement, you're embedding an interface or something as part of your code, the IDE auto completion will automatically include that interface or that class that you need, whereas Copilot doesn't. And, it just kind of throws in the class and then you have to go back and add the use statement or whatever later on. So I'm sure that will get better and maybe there's already, some improvements in that. But yeah, when I first implemented it, that was my biggest headache was trying to fight with the two systems.
So it's not like pair programming where it's you and one other person.
Right.
It's like pair. It's like multiple programmers. You and then two angels or devils on your shoulders. Constantly fighting for your attention.
A lot of times I would use both. Like I used to use like a doc block extension in VS Code to like scaffold out the headings of a class or a function or whatever, and then I'll go back and erase part of it and have Copilot write the rest of it.
So have you gotten? So that's interesting because I do in VS Code. I use. Let me see. I have it open right here. I think it's called Doc Blocker, right?
I think that's the one I use.
So do you still have that installed, or have you like?
I do. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, sometimes you learn.
Yeah.
This thing's quicker.
Yeah.
For the workflow, and so you learn which tool
Yeah.
is the most efficient over time. But sometimes it slows you down.
That's interesting you mentioned that one because that's kind of one of the really kind of cool features of Copilot where you can. I don't know if you have to just put your cursor in the function. I normally just highlight the whole function, and then you can right click and navigate your way down to like it says generate docs. And it will generate a doc block above that function that has a title, a description, and then the parameters as well.
Okay, I haven't actually used that
Yeah, so it kind
option, but
of
that's cool.
it does a better job than Doc Blocker, the kind of old school VS Code extension, because Doc Blocker just kind of gives you the template and says, add your title here, add a description here. But Copilot, it reads your function and it writes your title, it writes your description for you. So
does it follow like the fully namespaced things for PHPCS and all that?
I believe it does. Yeah. So I was
awesome.
working on one earlier today. Let me look real quick. I can probably.
Yeah, that was one of the other problems I had was just, sometimes either Doc Blocker or Copilot, it spit something out and then PHPCS would fail. But
yeah. Oh, I don't have it open. Okay, I'm not going to go looking for it. I think it does. It's pretty nice though. I mean, because that's one of the things that AI does really good. You give it a block of text and tell it to summarize, and
for sure,
it can do that. All right. How do you get it? Like, where do you go? What does it cost? Like, if you're using VS Code, and we'll probably talk about VS Code mostly today, but there is a PhpStorm extension as well. What's the process?
Yeah, so I only have the experience with VS Code. It's installing a plugin just like you would any other VS Code extension. and then there's a process. I can't remember exactly, but you generate tokens in GitLab or GitHub, sorry, and authenticate it, maybe like an OAuth type thing. But you authenticate the extension to your GitHub account, and then it's $10 a month or $100 a year, I think is the current pricing.
Yeah, there's a free trial for, I think, 30-day free trial, but then
Okay.
$10 a month after that, I believe.
Yep. But then at that point, it's pretty much enabled. I haven't gotten into like customizing any of the options in the settings.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are some, but I haven't. I know you can exclude certain files from being sent to GitHub for privacy purposes.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, once you have it enabled, you get a little icon in the bottom right-hand corner of your IDE that shows whenever it's processing. And it's like, as you're typing, I think once you pause, there's like a brief timeout and it'll go, try to make a HTTP request to GitHub to
Right.
get you some magic.
So one thing I noticed is after you install the extension, you actually get two extensions. I'm not sure how that actually works. I don't know if it's like a Drupal module where you download a Drupal project, you can get multiple modules. But when I installed the main GitHub Copilot extension, I also got the GitHub Copilot chat extension.
Oh, okay. Is that, yeah. So when I set it up, that wasn't out yet.
Oh, okay.
But I think, and there might even be another extension just for like GitHub integration that gets installed. I'm not really sure, but yeah, the GitHub chat has come out recently, semi-recently, and is
Yeah, and that one's kind of cool because it basically gives you a little icon in, I don't know what that left-hand bar
yep.
of VS Code is called. And it literally just opens like a chat GPT window, but again, it's got the context kind of built in. So you don't have to say, I'm a developer writing in PHP. You don't have to write any of that. You just start asking direct questions about the language or your file or your project. So that's kind of neat.
Yep.
And you can kind of do that. You can kind of have that same type of conversation inline in your code as well. And this is one of the features. We're going to start getting to the features of Copilot right now. But one of the primary kind of interfaces, I guess, with it is within code comments, where you can, if you want to create a new function, you can start writing a code comment that basically says, create a function that does blah, 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 takes these as arguments and outputs this and has this logic. But something else you can do in these code comments is use the Q: syntax and ask any question you want. So it's kind of just like ChatGPT within code comments. So other than that, maybe I stole your thunder. I'm sorry if I did. What are some of the other features of GitHub Copilot that you use regularly?
Yeah. So, I mean, going back to your statement about the writing a comment and then having it react to your comment, I think that was like one of the first implementations of the extension. And I had the biggest problem with that. You would like write your comment and then expect it to autocomplete some code or do something else, and it keeps writing more comments for you. And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm wanting. So that integration, I guess, is getting better, and they're moving towards like the inline chat feature and the chat sidebar and that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's funny. Yeah, that was my biggest headache early on.
It was auto-completing your comment
it was just adding
more
comments for me, like describing what I was trying to get it to do. It was just elaborating on that.
Well, but that's kind of like if you're a pair programmer.
That's true.
And you've got a thought in your head.
Yeah.
And you're trying to explain it to the other person. The other person is probably going to ask you questions.
Right. And then at the end of the day, I had like 5 lines of comments that it was just like a hallucination of the LLM or something. But yeah, so I didn't use that feature much. But yeah, I mean, I think, as far as the features I do use, how I use Copilot, I use it for writing like boilerplate stuff, just scaffolding out things that I don't want to have to type out. I know creating a new class or something like that and adding all the namespaces and the classes that are being used and that kind of stuff. It's really good at just kind of spitting out a base like block plugin or something like that if you needed it to.
But how specific, in that example, how specific do you have to be with your prompt though? If you, can you just open up an empty file, give it a name and say, create a Drupal 10 block plugin that does this? Like how close or how specific do you need to be?
You can. So yeah, I mean, the more you put in, the more you get out kind of thing. And then, I think yeah, if you just wanted to spit out like a block plugin that's just the scaffold of, all the functions that you need to call and the classes you need to extend, it does a really good job at that.
All right. So the obvious question is, better than Drush generate or roughly equivalent?
Yeah, so I don't have a ton of experience with just Drush Generate. I used to use the Drupal CLI for generating some stuff, but I mean, I think it's faster, maybe, I don't know. I think I would use it. It would just be my tool that I go to first. But yeah, the scaffolding out, that kind of stuff, you can like put in the criteria of what you want that block to do and, have it generate maybe some of the config form and that kind of stuff for the block. But I don't try to do that all at once usually. I just, I find it creates a lot of junk.
If you ask too much at once, so you're thinking.
Yeah, in my experience,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, I've gone through and I'm like, oh, I have to create, this thing. I'm going to give all this context to Copilot or GPT or any LLM that I've tried and try to use what it puts out. And then at the end of the day, I spend more time like refactoring and debugging the crap that it spit out. So yeah, I mean, anything that's boilerplate, comment related, like just time saving stuff, that's my go-to currently. Now I know it's going to get better over time.
Yeah. So some of the other features that I've played around with that I find really interesting, explaining code snippets. I've actually had some success with that, especially like with JavaScript, because I'm not a huge JavaScript guy. So there are definitely times where I have highlighted 10, 20 lines of JavaScript, and the way I've done it is I'll put a comment, after like the last line that I'm interested in, and I will write, you know, explain the previous 30 lines of code to me. And it'll spit out, a few paragraphs of code, and it'll start very generic and then get very specific. And it almost sometimes feels like where you have, and we all know this type of person where they pretend to know a lot more than they know,
Right.
right? And at some point they're like, I feel like they're just repeating things that I can see as well, and they're not really adding much to the conversation.
Yeah, and I'm thankful that all this stuff's coming out after Drupal 8 and everything has kind of been established
Yeah,
because I feel like I have gotten Drupal 7 codes returned, but
yeah,
it's less. I could only imagine if we were like in
right in the
that
middle of that.
in
Yeah,
that yeah, it would be a disaster. But yeah, so I haven't used the explain too much, but that's a super helpful tip.
yeah. I just discovered last week it was that, as I said, I've been in the habit of highlight a block of code and create a comment that asks to explain it. But there is actually, you can highlight code, right click, and then there's a Copilot submenu that pops out that has explain this, which basically does the same thing. Same places where that generate docs.
I was gonna say one of the other big features I use for is like, if you write a block of code and maybe it's a switch statement or an if statement, and it's nested and it's kind of messy, like, just highlight it and ask Copilot to refactor it, in a more efficient manner. And
Oh,
that
that's actually not a bad idea. Yeah.
usually works pretty good, or like, it can make it a one-liner sometimes if you want, like to just do it real simple.
Yeah, I find that when I'm writing code, I tend to write very verbose code, like especially with if statements,
Hmm.
just because I want to be able to like see that flow. And I know that there are probably more concise ways of writing stuff like that. And yeah, I actually haven't thought about trying that to say, refactor or simplify this code. That's interesting.
Yeah, one thing I did yesterday or sometime this week was like highlight a class that wasn't using dependency injection, like it wasn't using the create, and
Right.
passing all the things to the constructor. It was just calling like the static Drupal or whatever, and highlight that and told it to rewrite, with dependency injection, rewrite class. And so all my code stayed the same. I didn't have to worry about it like hallucinating, doing crazy things
And
with,
did it got it right?
yeah, I mean, it spit it out.
No kidding. Wow. All
Yeah.
right. That's
So,
interesting.
I had to guide it a little bit with the prompt, I think, but
Yeah,
yeah, it did
that's
fine.
interesting.
Yeah, like I told it to use I can never remember the name of the class that's implementing the interface for a block that does all that. I can't ever remember.
Yeah.
So that's why I have Copilot.
Container, plugin, dependency,
Yes,
injection.
that
It's
guy.
those four words in some order. I don't know if
Yes,
that's the right order or not.
that example right there is just something that Copilot is good for, because if you can't remember that kind of stuff, you're often trying to look through the code or Googling or whatever. Now it's just here it is.
I wrote a 15-week course because I couldn't remember stuff like that. So
Nice.
I went a little bit extreme on that.
Yeah, what's that course?
Oh, thank you very much for asking. That's very kind of you. It's a professional module development.
Yeah.
Next semester starts soon.
Okay.
So, since I don't know when people are listening to this, I can't give an exact date. I just have to say soon, twice a year.
Check DrupalEasy.com, right?
Oh my gosh, you're the best. Hey, have you played with the fix it? There's literally on that same contextual menu, right click, Copilot, there's a fix this or fix it.
I have not.
Option. Yeah, I haven't. I test it.
Okay.
Like I literally not test as in I'm going to test it now. I'm like, but I will, and I just tried this again this morning because I hadn't used it in a few weeks, where I had it was a big long if statement with, an array was in there. So I had all kinds of parentheses and square brackets, and I randomly removed one of the parentheses from somewhere in there. And then I highlighted that one line and I told Copilot to fix this. And it didn't really fix it. It refactored it, but it was still a syntax error. So I haven't had great success with that, but that might be, I don't know if that's a newer feature or not, because I probably should have mentioned, I've probably been using this for about a month.
Okay. Yeah, anything to help with those, things. I think it's going to help new programmers that are coming along, that remember the days of like being in just a text editor. There wasn't an IDE and you missed a comma or missed some character, and it's like hours of what is going on.
But it's still, it's like an overconfident friend.
That's true.
Like, right? It's you gotta take it all with a grain of salt and, call them on their BS if necessary.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting, I think, because there's like that preconceived thing that people know LLMs are unreliable. Like they kind of roll out these extensions and these AI tools half-baked, and they get better over time. But it's kind of funny that, they're very buggy tools.
How about there's a feature to generate tests? We were talking beforehand. You said you haven't really played with that, right?
I have not, huh?
So
sounds like you have.
Yeah, for the heck of it, I generate. So one of the modules I maintain is a Markdown Easy module. Just very, very straightforward implementation of Markdown in a text filter. And we have a service class. And so I said, you know what? I don't actually have a unit test for one of these methods in the service class in the module. Granted, it's a very simple, method, but so I said, all right, well, let me highlight this function or put my cursor in the function and use Copilot's, generate test functionality and see what happens. And I got to tell you, I was pretty freaking impressed with this one because it didn't actually create the test in the right place.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't put it in the test/unit or test/src/unit directory. I think it just dumped it in the same directory as my service class. But other than that, it extended the PHP unit-based class, unit test-based class, as opposed to the Drupal.
Oh, right.
Which again, two things that were very easy to fix. Especially I have experience writing tests, so they were very obvious to me that it should obviously the file should have been created there. So I moved it, I changed the namespace, and then I extended the the class I wanted, and it worked.
That's awesome.
With just those two little changes. Yeah, it was really impressive. And I actually went through the code a couple of times because I didn't believe that it was, I really didn't change any code other than that. Other than I use PhpStorm a lot. So there was, and I like to get up. I think I'm working on trying to get most of my code to get past levels or comply with level 6.
Okay.
PhpStorm. And Copilot isn't up to PhpStorm level 6 yet, we'll say. So there's some additional little work there, but
sure.
I was actually really excited about that. And I'm like looking for reasons to create more tests with it now.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Just to see.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point about, it generated the thing most of the way, but you had the knowledge to know where it failed. And that's a big thing. Like I wouldn't try to use Copilot to write something I don't have any experience with. And I mentioned this earlier, like, if you try to get it to do too much, the output is no good. And then you're sitting there debugging something that is just not right, and you're wasting a ton of time. So if you have that knowledge,
Yeah.
it's a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah. The way I look at it is and you can say this for most AI. It right now, we should think about it as making us more efficient, not making us smarter,
Right.
right? Because
Absolutely.
yeah, it'll make us faster, and but without like that knowledge to double check our overconfident AI friend, we're probably going to cause more trouble than it's worth, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm curious to see where that goes in the future. It's like like when you start learning these things, where are you going to go? Are you going to go to the traditional, methods, or are these things going to start teaching? I'm sure they are, but it's kind of interesting.
Early days.
Yeah.
All right, a couple more questions. So I have an opinion on this one, and I have a feeling you'll probably have the same opinion. But in your experience with Copilot, do you find that it gets the Drupal stuff, let's say, like when you prompt it or you have autocomplete Drupal things, as opposed to just kind of pure PHP code? Does it do as good of a job? Very leading question on my part.
Yeah, yeah. I can tell your opinion already. No, I mean, I think it does okay. The core language stuff is going to be better. But yeah, there's definitely things that as a Drupal developer, that what it's returning is either, not the best coding standards for Drupal, or, there's better ways to do it, more efficient ways. So yeah, I think that the whole abstraction of Drupal on top of Copilot, you kind of have to baby it, at least for now.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, like the context is really important. Like when you're working, and I don't have the answer to this, maybe you do, but when you're working in a Drupal project, it knows about the files you have open, but it doesn't necessarily know about the files you don't have open.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the big question in my head, does it know that you're writing a Drupal 10 site? Like how much knowledge does it have?
That's a good question. I mean, I think I usually put that in the prompt. I think a lot of times like help it along. But there is, going into our next topic, the new features. They just rolled out workspace context in Copilot. So in the chat window, you can type @workspace before your prompt, and it will basically do a search on your workspace for text that matches. It's almost like just like an Apache Solr type search. Like it searches all the code. It finds things that might be relevant in your entire project, and then it passes those as the context to the LLM. So that gives you more of like the whole, you're trying to find something deep within a project, or something that may need more context than just one file.
Are there other little magic keywords like that? You said @workspace. I've never used any of those.
Yeah, I just saw it today, actually looking at it, and I didn't have much luck trying it before the call, but
Okay.
I know there's that one. There's a couple other ones, but that seemed like the biggest new feature that they rolled out, because it does have all the additional context for your prompt.
So is Copilot making you faster, making you more efficient? Because I would imagine, I know for me, when I first started using it, it probably made me a little bit slower because I'm playing with it so much and I'm trying things. I'm trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. But once
Yep.
I know that you've been using it for more than a couple of months. I mean, are you more efficient now? Are you comfortable with it, or are you?
Yeah, you learn what it's good at and what it's not good at, and just that the whole scaffolding, comments, just the boilerplate stuff that you would normally be typing out, it
Yeah.
solves that. And that's just a waste of time at the end of the day. So having it do those things is awesome.
Yeah, and for someone, someone like both of us who, generally are working as contractors for other folks. I mean, $10 a month is nothing,
Right.
right? It's nothing if it's going to save you conservatively, an hour a week,
Yep.
right? Very conservatively, that's well worth it at that point.
Yep.
So, okay, so final question, as someone who's been using it for a while, and you kind of already answered this, but I want to circle back again. Like, where do you kind of lean on it the most when you're, knee deep in a project at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, and you're just, head down working on something? Like, what are those instances where you are like using it the most?
Yeah, I think back to my original answer, just the boilerplate stuff. Anything that's like related to debugging, I don't use it.
Okay.
Xdebug is still, I just don't see that,
Yeah.
until Copilot has like Xdebug integration where it's seeing your state change over time within a
Yeah.
request, like, it's just not a good debug tool. It's a time-saving tool for looking up things that you can't remember, right? Like write a regex to do this, or what's the syntax for the form states, right? Because I do that like once every 3 months. I have to write in the form API the state stuff, and I can never remember the syntax, and bam, it'll spit that stuff out without having to go out of the IDE, and the context switching kills, right? If you have to
Yeah.
change your train of thought and get into some other tool, Google or whatever it is, that kills your productivity. So just having it right there is invaluable.
Right. All right. Cool. All right. Well, Andy, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the DrupalEasy podcast. Don't forget to check out all of our long-form Drupal training courses at DrupalEasy.com, and stay tuned for the next episode of the DrupalEasy podcast. See ya!